Okay, hello everyone. As promised, here is a kind of additional piece on using charts, using graphs, or in general using data visualization as a part of your scientific visual communication. It's a little bit of a summary of everything that we can discuss when we talk about data visualization. I've tried to condense everything into roughly 4 big ideas that we need to talk about, and at the end I'll also present a few tools which we can commonly use to create data visuals. So if we want to create graphs, what we are trying to do is actually we are turning numbers, data, raw data, into shapes, into something which is visual. When we do so, we should be very aware of what the goal is. And I don't necessarily here in this situation mean the message of your visual or the story of your visual. That's of course also important. But here I literally mean we are taking our numbers and we are making them visual. Why are we doing that? What is it with the numbers that we are trying to do? I will explain in a minute why that's important. But just to give you an idea, there are like 7 potential goals that we might have with our numbers and making them visual. Maybe we are trying to make a comparison between numbers, or we are trying to rank numbers from largest to smallest or from smallest to largest, etc. We are trying to do a comparison. I have a little bar chart there on the right hand side just to give you an idea. The bar chart is ideal if we want to compare numbers with each other. The comparison has a little bit of a smaller sibling if you want, the parts to whole comparison, which is represented by the pie chart. The difference is that we are still trying to do a comparison, but we're not trying to compare numbers with each other, but we are trying to compare numbers every time with an entire group, with an entire set, an entire population, an entire 100%. For example, you have done a survey and you want to know which fraction of the entire population has answered option A, for example. Then we're talking about a bar to whole comparison. It's a bit of a subtle difference, but it will determine whether a pie chart is more suited or whether maybe a normal bar chart is more suited for what we're trying to visualize. Sometimes we want to show a distribution of numbers. Think of histograms, think of box plots, think of this kind of density plots. And when the dimension that we want to show the distribution over are geographical coordinates like latitude, longitude, then we're talking about the spatial distribution and we're in the realm of maps. That's why that's a bit of a separate special category. Typically, if we have 2 or 3 dimensions, we have, for example, x values and y values. We want to see if there's a correlation between the x values and the y values, if they are linked in one way or another. And we're not necessarily talking about a causation, but we can at least figure out whether there's a correlation. And for those types of problems or goals, a scatter plot is the most typical solution. If one of those dimensions is time, then we are typically going to put that on the horizontal axis. Makes the most sense for most people. And then we're looking at line charts in order to show an evolution. And then there's a bit of a 7th category, which is a bit the odd one out, you could say. But those are all kinds of charts which are related to showing a hierarchy. Maybe we have a parent group and then we have some subcategories below that parent group. We want to show how they are all related. Then we're talking about dendrograms, maybe tree maps, sunburst diagrams, all that kind of stuff where the hierarchy is important. Why am I telling you all of this? Not because you have to memorize all of this, but because it is going to help you in choosing the correct type of chart for your data visualization. Knowing what you're trying to do with the numbers is the most deciding factor in which chart is appropriate or is maybe less appropriate. And most chart libraries, if you want, or chart repositories, there are dozens, if not hundreds of different types of charts, work by classifying the chart types in these big groups based on their goal, based on their functionality. For example, chart.guide is a nice one. Doesn't have that many different chart types, but it summarizes them nicely in one big poster that you can print and hang on your bedroom wall if you want. And here you can see In purple, for example, we have all the comparison chart types. We have the bar chart there in the top left, but also all of these alternatives for bar charts. The blue, there we have the line chart, so those are charts really suited to show an evolution. We have a lot of alternatives for line charts there as well. Green is the part-to-whole comparison. You notice that the pie chart is grayed out and that it mentions not recommended, but more on that later. In yellow, we have the distributions. In orange, the spatial distributions. And then in red, in this case, a bit of a combination between hierarchy and correlation. There are lots of different chart libraries out there, but they all work in roughly the same way by grouping different kinds of charts. What you will also sometimes find is a kind of flow chart that with a few questions guides you to what the perfect chart type is for the problem you have, which can be a good start, but I'm not always that fond of those types of flow charts, because what comes out is one specific type of chart as an answer to your problem, but very rarely is there one specific type of chart that's going to be the ultimate answer to your problem based on the data you have. Most of the times it's also very important what exactly is it that you want to highlight, which part of the story do you want to put the spotlight on. That is also going to play a role in what chart type is most suited for your needs. So we have defined our goal. We know why we are making our numbers visual. Next step is choosing the chart type that goes best together with that goal we have. Again, dozens, if not hundreds of chart types, at least I would guess around 150 different chart types that we can work with. Which one is the most appropriate? Let's just start with the most common ones and the three workhorses, if you want, of data visualization. Maybe we should add the scatter plot to this one, but the bar chart, the line chart and the pie chart, I would say combined make up 90% of the data visualization that we see and are also going to be able to solve almost all of your data visualization issues. So if we know what they can do, what their strengths and their weaknesses are, we can get quite far. By the way, fun fact, I'm always surprised, but these three chart types, bar, line, pie, are all invented by the same guy, William Playfair, at the end of the 18th century. It kind of blows my mind, first of all, that we didn't really have those types of charts going around before that time, but also that just one guy can decide, okay, I need some charts, I'm going to invent some new chart types, and nowadays those are the three big workhorses of data visualization. Okay, let's just quickly have a look at those and see what can potentially go wrong or how we can potentially improve them. For example, a bar chart. Everyone knows a bar chart. Super solid choice if you want to do a comparison with your numbers. There is one big potential pitfall with a bar chart. I will maybe give you a few seconds to have a look at this chart and try to figure out what is not working in this bar chart or what is not ideal in this bar chart. If you look at this bar chart for a while, you will notice that the horizontal axis, in this case, it doesn't start at 0, it starts at 65%. Now, this is something that you will commonly hear in data visualization discussions, is you always have to start your axis at 0. That's not necessarily true, but it is true absolutely when you are using bar charts. Why? Because we are using the length of the bars in order to do the comparison. We are visualizing the numbers or encoding the numbers, if you want, in the length of the bars. And we want to compare the numbers, so we want to compare the length of the bars. If we don't start our axis at 0, we are, let's say, cutting off a big part of the bar and the entire comparison falls apart. Here, if you look at the bar for the Netherlands, it's more than twice as big as the bar for Belgium. But the value, 82.8%, is definitely not more than twice as big than the value for Belgium, 71.4%. So in a bar chart, always start your axis at 0. The chart on the right, for example, would be a more truthful, a more appropriate chart. But a bit of a side note, of course, with that, because I understand that in a lot of situations, okay, this is more correct, but it is not probably the ideal way of representing this data, because we are interested in those small differences. Okay, they are small, but we're still interested in them, even if they are just a few percentage points. So I understand that we're looking for a way to zoom in on this part of the chart, but not starting our axis at 0 is not the right solution. If you're ever in this kind of situation, probably the best solution is to look at different chart types, which are also good to do a comparison, but don't rely on the length of bars to do so. For example, a dot plot is a common alternative, where we're using not the length of bars, but the horizontal position of dots in order to represent the numbers. Especially if you can add something like an average value or a kind of benchmark. Here we have done it with this dashed line. We are actually comparing the horizontal position of the dots with the horizontal position of the dashed line, which makes this a very strong visual, and we can easily zoom in without doing too much harm because the comparison remains intact. The next type of basic chart is the line chart. Again, everyone knows what a line chart is, how a line chart works. When we have time, we put it on the horizontal axis, typically, and we have our line chart. One potential problem with a line chart is that it is not super effective as soon as we start putting many lines on a single line chart, which is sometimes called a line chart spaghetti. I would guess that a line chart can support 3, 4, maybe 5 different lines, depending on your data. If you're lucky with your data, it can maybe support even more lines. But for example, here in this case, we have 12 different lines. It's already difficult to find 12 different colors for all of these lines, but they start overlapping a lot. And so it becomes really hard to extract the data we want to extract. If I would ask you, okay, have a look at the name Deborah as a baby name. When was it most popular and how popular is it today? It's really hard to find that exact shade of blue, to identify the correct line, and to see how that line is moving throughout the chart. As always, when your issue is I have too much stuff in my visual, the solution is break the visual apart, maybe into multiple visuals or multiple panels with less stuff on them each. In data visualization terminology, this is called a small multiples approach, because we create multiple copies of the same visual, but we make it a lot smaller so we can put them together in a single visual. Of course, this is a kind of compromise because we have smaller visuals, but now it becomes super easy to find the line we are looking for and to extract the data or to see how the pattern looks like. So we repeat all of the lines on each of these small multiples, but we make most of the lines gray and we make just one line stand out. And we repeat this 12 times for each of the 12 different lines. Now we can immediately find Deborah and we can see that peaked around 1960 and nowadays it's almost back completely at 0. Admittedly, this is a little bit of a contrived example. It's made for educational purposes. If you would like an example which is more realistic, I have something for you from early days of the COVID pandemic, March 2020. The Financial Times was a little bit the front runner when it comes to data visualization during those early days of the pandemic. You might have seen these kinds of charts where we have time on the horizontal axis and then we have an exponential or logarithmic vertical axis with the number of cases or with the number of deaths in this case. The Financial Times was the first one to do it this way, and then it has been copied by virtually every news agency or newspaper all over the world. This is the chart for March 15. It still kind of works because we don't have that many countries, but you can already feel what's going to happen if we move a little bit into the future. So 10 days later, this is how that same visual started to look like. And you can see that they have to start working with annotations, with these little star icons, with dashed lines, just to make it still accessible or make it still readable. But it's a very overwhelming chart, and it's even certain parts are not readable anymore. Belgium, for example, is on this chart, but it is literally impossible to see how the situation in Belgium has evolved. So of course this is not a manageable situation to continue. Depending on the format we're working in, there are different ways to solve this problem. If we are working online, we can play a little bit with interactivity, maybe with some hover effects, or we can have a little filter button or something similar. If we are working in a static situation, like in a presentation, or maybe in a printed newspaper, as was the situation here, we can have a look at a small multiples approach. And that's exactly what they did. Again, another 10 days later. We have much smaller visuals now, of course, but we can immediately find Belgium because they're all nicely sorted alphabetically, and we can quickly compare the evolution in Belgium with the evolution in all of the other countries. Here they did a nice little trick with making all of the lines gray, but still highlighting 4 important countries in a bit of darker gray, which gives you even more context or makes it even easier to compare the trends. A small multiples approach, by the way, I mentioned it here when we're talking about line charts, but it's not necessarily only for line charts. You can conceive a scatter plot where you have all of the data in a big nice scatter plot, but there will be a little bit of overlap. It will be a little bit hard to tell apart the clusters maybe. Well, you can have a small multiples visual next to the main scatter plot where you highlight each time one of the clusters. That might be a possibility that I have explored in the past. Good. Our third workhorse of data visualization is the pie chart. Pie chart's ideal if you want to do a part-to-whole comparison, so you have a kind of group of 100% or a kind of entire population. If you remember from chart.guide, it was grayed out, not recommended. There are a lot of people in the data visualization world who will be very angry with you if you try to use pie chart. It's a little bit like using Comic Sans in front of a designer. Well, using pie chart in front of a data visualizer is the same thing. It's a little bit risky. Don't worry, I'm not that kind of person, but there is a reason behind those people's concerns. There has been scientific research done which shows that our brain is really not that good at comparing areas with each other, two-dimensional areas. If you see the same data here in a pie chart versus in a bar chart, it's quite hard to tell the difference in the segments of the pie charts from each other. In the bar charts, even though the differences are small, you can see them very, very easily. So our brain is really good at comparing the lengths of these bars, but comparing these segments with each other, that's really hard to do. And that's enough reason for a lot of people to say, okay, then we're just going to throw out the pie charts altogether. I wouldn't be that extreme. I think a pie chart definitely has its value. Everyone knows how to use it. Everyone knows what a pie chart is, how to read it. As long as we don't have too many categories, I think it could definitely work. There are, of course, a few other pitfalls in a pie chart. If I give you a few seconds, you will probably notice what is wrong or what is not ideal in this pie chart. Here we have a pie chart where the total of all the percentages doesn't add up to 100%. So the entire circle doesn't represent the entire population, in this case of respondents from a survey question, which can happen. So here it's from a survey, so when people can select multiple answers, for example, then almost by definition we cannot just add the percentages together and expect them to be 100%. I'm not really sure if technically this is a completely wrong pie chart. I think it is still okay to make it in this way, but it loses its entire purpose. We expect that the circle represents the entire population of 100%, but it doesn't in this case. So in these kinds of situations, almost always we can revert back to our trusted old friend, the bar chart. Notice, by the way, here that we have a bar chart with a little bit of gray backgrounds. For each of the bars, the gray background indicates where the 100% is located. So it gives you a bit, let's say, the best of both worlds. And for a kind of part-to-whole comparison, we can still see, how big the values are. We can also see how big they are compared to the total group of 100%. It's a little bit of noise maybe, but it helps in achieving our goal of doing the parts to whole comparison. So those are the major ones: bar chart if you want to do a comparison, line chart for an evolution, and a pie chart for a part to whole comparison. However, as mentioned, there are 150, if not more, types of charts out there to help you. So you don't have to go for one of these 3, or if we add the scatter plot, for one of the 4 basic chart types. We've already mentioned chart.guide, where you can very quickly find an alternative for some of those. Chart.guide, nice, works with the categories that we already know, but doesn't have that many chart types maybe to choose from, and not that much information always. One of the DataVis libraries I like is the DataVis catalog, where you have, again, not that many chart types, around 60 in this case. The usual suspects are on there, so you will see a bar chart and a pie chart, but maybe also something more unexpected, like a Marimekko chart, or a Nightingale Rose chart, or a Kagi chart, or something like that. And if we click on one of these chart types, you will not only get an example, an explanation of how it works, an overview of the functions, so those are the categories that we discussed earlier. You get some ideas for similar charts, so maybe you're thinking of making a tree map, but with the same data you can probably also make a nice circle packing or Marimekko chart or sunburst diagram. And then what's probably most interesting for most of us is also a list of tools that we can use to generate this specific type of chart. There are both code-based tools, so if you know how to program in JavaScript or Python or R, you can probably find something in there for you. If you don't want to program, there are a lot of web apps for you. A lot of them are free, some of them are freemium, or some of them are paid. And even in Microsoft Office, so a tree map you can make in Excel, so it's included in there as well. So it immediately gives you an option, and if you click one of those links, you will be brought to a page with immediately a tutorial or an explanation of how to make a tree map in this or that specific tool. And then, especially if you're interested about tools, you should check out the Chartmaker directory. If you go to the Chartmaker directory, let's have a look how it looks like. It's like a big matrix. Every row is a chart type. So you can scroll down if you want. The colors tell us something about the categories again, and every column is a tool. So you can use this in 2 different ways. Let's say you have a specific chart type in mind, for example a bullet chart. Well, you can probably make that in D3, in DataWrapper, in Datilon, in Fusion charts, because you have solutions, or you have examples, or you have tutorials for each of these. So every little dot here is a link to an example. Or the other way around, if you're working with a specific tool, let's say you're working with Flourish, well, you can probably make a bar chart or a clustered bar chart, but a bullet chart or a polar chart, there are no examples. So probably you will have a hard time creating those chart types with that specific tool. Just for your entertainment, let's say some of my personal favorites, like less common chart types. Favorite sometimes because they are simple to make, or also because I think they are quite useful. A waffle chart, for example, is a nice alternative for a pie chart. If you want to show one or maybe a few percentages, well, you can just draw 100 identical shapes, circles, sometimes squares, and you color the number of them depending on the percentages that you want to visualize. And then you have a quick and easy way of showing a number rather than just writing it, or rather than just telling it. You can make something like this quickly in Excel or Inkscape or whatever. It's relatively easy. And it's also more flexible. A pie chart is always around, is sometimes a bit hard to fit in your layout. Well, a waffle chart, you can make a square one like this. We can make a more rectangular one like this. This one has 1000 shapes, the previous one had 100 shapes. This already starts to look like a kind of stacked bar chart, but it's still technically a waffle chart because we can still identify the individual shapes, which is nice. Another alternative might be a tree map, especially if you have like many categories. I mentioned that the pie chart I would go to maybe up to 5 categories. Well, what do you do if you have all of the countries in Europe? Well, then maybe a tree map might be a better solution. Of course, there are always going to be like these smaller items, in this case near the bottom right of the tree map. Then I prefer to work with a little bit of a list. That's one solution, but we're mainly interested here in what the biggest blocks are, what the biggest groups are. And if you want to be really fancy, you can make this into something circular, and not with a normal tree map division, but in this case with a Voronoi algorithm. So we come up with a kind of circular Voronoi chart, which is always a little bit more fancy, maybe in some report or infographic that might be useful. Some kind of Voronoi chart like this one you could make with raw graphs, if that is something that you fancy. Raw graphs, which we will demonstrate in just a minute. We can have a slope graph, which is basically just a minimal type of line chart, a line chart between just comparing 2 points in time, or sometimes 2 situations, and then by definition we have straight lines connecting these 2 points in time, and apparently our brain is really good at comparing slopes with each other. We can quickly see which ones are going up or down and which one go up or down the most. And then if we are talking about comparisons between 2 situations or 2 groups or 2 points in time, I also like to use a dumbbell chart. Dumbbell chart is like the dot plot we have seen earlier, but we have 2 groups of dots in this case. We typically give them a different color and we connect them with a little bit of a line. For example, here we're looking at different jobs in the situation without and with the use of generative AI. Why do I like dumbbell charts so much? Is because they give you an opportunity to visually show the gap between 2 situations. We could solve the same problem here with a kind of bar chart, grouped bar chart, but that would focus the attention a lot on the actual numbers, while maybe we want to put the spotlight a bit more on the gap between the numbers. Here we can, for example, quickly see, oh, really big gap there for an educator and workforce training, 15 to 54. That's a big gray bar, that's a big gap, and only a tiny gap for, let's say, builders between 49 and 53. If we want to talk about the gap, if that's the important part of our story, we can find a chart type where we visualize the gap, not necessarily the numbers, but also the gap. And a dumbbell chart does that kind of thing. Or let's say that you want to visualize something that flows. Every time when you hear the word flow, your first thought should be, oh, maybe I can turn this into a little Sinky diagram. For example, the flow of goods, the flow of energy, in this case, the flow of people or voters between how they voted in the 2012 presidential elections in the US and how they intended to vote in the 2016 presidential elections. It's already an old example. And you can see quite a lot of information actually in here. There are 15 different flows, and the width of the flows, of course, tells us something about the size of the groups. And so most people who voted for Obama in 2012 intended to vote for Hillary Clinton, but there's also a stream that goes towards Trump, a stream which was still unsure, and so on. So 15 different streams on here. It's actually quite a lot of information. A Sankey diagram is actually quite information dense. It can pack quite a lot of information into a single visual. That's why you will sometimes see visuals like this one, a nice big Sankey diagram, but it has lots of information. It has the entire energy production and consumption in the US for an entire year. So we have on the left hand side the ways that the energy was produced. We can see how much of it was used for electricity generation or how much was used directly. For example, petroleum and natural gas are used directly quite a lot for energy. And then we have the sectors where they were used. Was it for residential use or commercial, industrial, transportation? And we can even see on the very right hand side which part of the energy was used effectively and which part of the energy was lost due to heat, friction, etc. So in the entire energy consumption, we even have all the numbers if you want, but it's not overwhelming. It's still manageable, fits into a nice single A4 size page visual because of the power of the Sankey diagram. Okay, and then we're nearly there. We know what kind of chart we want to use, the one that enables us to highlight the story that we want to highlight. Then all we have to do is what we've already discussed countless times before. We can maximize the signal to noise ratio. So we can remove as much physical noise as possible. We can remove grid lines, legends, access sticks, etc. Things that if we remove them, they don't harm the message. So it means that they were kind of noise, they were not necessary to tell the story. We can also remove physical noise or thinking work by adding a bit of color, by adding some annotations that immediately guide our audience to what they want to know, that give the key message of our visual away on a silver platter. So these are the same techniques, of course, that we see in any kind of scientific visual in charts. It's basically exactly the same thing. Okay, and the final part then of this video, let's talk a little bit about tools. What tools are specifically useful for creating charts or data visuals. We've already seen a lot of these tools when we were talking about other kinds of scientific visuals. Well, I've summarized them here a little bit in a little bit of a scatter plot. It's all very subjective, of course. It's not meant to overwhelm you. It's also not meant to brag, or it's not even meant to be exhaustive or anything. I want to show you two things with this overview. First of all, the breadth of tools is enormous. You have very easy tools like a Canva, an infogram that will work immediately out of the box. A lot of people work with Excel, PowerPoint. If you have more time to spare, if you know how to program, you can have a look at JavaScript, Python, R with their dedicated libraries. If you want to spend time on how to work with Illustrator, Photoshop, whatever, people make really nice charts in those tools. So there's an entire variety out of tools available for you to choose from. So don't worry too much about I have to learn this or that specific tool. Use the tool that you feel comfortable with, or use a tool that you want to learn, and almost all of these tools are going to give you really nice charts as long as you follow the principles that we have seen before. That's one part of my key message. Choose whatever tool you prefer. Second part that I want to mention about tools is, in my experience, very often it's helpful to use a combination of tools. To not try to stick and to do everything in a single tool, but for example, combinations I typically make is make the base shapes in a tool like Excel and then make it look good in Illustrator or Inkscape. Or maybe we can make some basic shapes for some nice charts in raw graphs and then open them in PowerPoint and make sure they look good. So the tools which are near the bottom of this little scatter plot are tools which I think are really good at giving us the basic shapes that we need for our chart, but are not really that good at making them look good. And the tools near the top are not that good or not that handy to create shapes for the charts, but to make them look better, to add annotations, to add the colors we want, to add the text we want, put everything in the layout that we desire. Those tools near the top are going to help us. So very often we use a tool near the bottom for the first step, and then we finish things up with a tool near the top. You can, of course, with a lot of time and blood, sweat and tears, you can wrangle in R or even in Excel so that you can get something that looks really nice, but it's not always the most efficient path to follow. Probably there's a good point in time where you could say, okay, in R, I'm now 80% finished. I have the shapes I need. I'm going to export this as a vector image ideally, and I'm going to make it look good in one of the other tools. Two more groups that I want to say a little bit more about for the people who work a lot in Excel and maybe PowerPoint to create charts. Don't feel bad about that. A lot of people feel bad that they create a lot of charts in Excel. It doesn't feel very professional for them. Don't worry, I also make a lot of charts in Excel. The main idea, of course, or the main thing to do is to do your own thing with those charts and not to rely too much on the default options that Excel offers you. The defaults are not there to give you the most beautiful chart out of the box. The defaults are mainly there to give you an idea of everything you can do and add and change in your charts. For example, here we have 2 times exactly the same data. Both of these charts are created in Excel. They're even in exactly the same worksheet. But the one on the left is of course the default Excel bar chart you will get, and the one on the right, there we just spent more time and work on writing a better title and a nice subtitle, choosing colors that are more pleasing or that are more appropriate for what we are talking about. We managed to improve the signal to noise ratio by removing the legend, by having this kind of subtitles. We have removed all of those zeros in the vertical axis by using labels inside of the bars, which is something we can easily do in Excel. We've removed the grid lines and so on. The only thing you have to know, which is maybe a little bit of a trick here, is that this kind of split bar chart doesn't exist by default in Excel. So these are actually 2 bar charts next to each other. We just have to make sure that the scales are the same, but then we can nicely place them next to each other, and then the title is just a text box put on top of the charts. And then we have a nice chart that is still 100% Excel, but it doesn't necessarily scream that it is an Excel chart. That's a simple example, but we can get there in with 10 minutes of effort. If you want to spend more effort, for some reason you want some more beautiful Excel charts. These are charts that we made for the Federal Planning Bureau. They work in Excel. They only want to work in Excel because everyone there uses the same tools. Well, then it is our job to make really good looking charts in Excel by, again, applying the appropriate color combination, making sure that the order is logical. Here we are working with combination charts between an area chart and then a line chart on top. We have all these little text labels, these boxes, which are linked to cells in the worksheet. So when the data updates, the boxes also automatically update, and so on. I think the only thing here which is manual is in the left visual we have these dashed lines, which if the data updates, maybe we have to correct them a little bit. In the visual on the right we have the gray background, which is a little bit manual. So with the data update, then we might need to update those few elements as well. But again, with some work, with some attention and dedication, we can have visuals which are definitely not overwhelmingly clear that they are Excel visuals. They are really good visuals for the story that we're trying to tell. So don't worry if you work in Excel, don't feel bad. And then this center section, if you want, are kind of chart tool options that are a bit of a blind spot for a lot of people, where for example we find raw graphs, a tool that I would daily is maybe a bit of an exaggeration, but I use it definitely every week in order to create charts which are a little bit more out of the box. And then a little bit higher we have some interactive tool chart tools like a data wrapper, a Flourish, a local focus, which are also interesting, especially if you're looking for a bit of interactivity in your charts. So raw graphs, for example, here's a bit of a screenshot, but I will demonstrate later on how it looks like in practice. If you want to make a Sankey diagram, a B-swarm plot, a matrix chart, a Voronoi chart, circle packings, all those kind of out-of-the-box chart types, raw graphs should be your first place to go. Really great for those kind of out-of-the-box charts. Static. If you want to make static charts, raw graphs is a really nice tool. If you need to add a layer of interactivity, it depends a little bit on what you're looking for. If you are looking for, let's say, your more common line charts, bar charts, pie charts, but you want to have some tooltips or hover effects or something like that, then you should definitely check out Data Wrapper. DataWrapper is a German tool. They have it's a freemium tool, but the free option is really, really generous. Basically, only if you want to remove the attribution line created with DataWrapper at the bottom, or if you want to export as a vector image, then you should probably consider the paid version, which is, I prefer, quite expensive. But otherwise, if you can live with a little bit of attribution near the bottom, it's a really, really helpful tool for creating or for interactive charts that you can embed in a website, or you can even embed it in a presentation or something similar. Every time you go to, let's say, the website of the Standaard or the Tijd or the Morgen or VRT News, and you see something, a chart which is a little bit interactive, which has some tooltips, also maps. DataWrapper is really great for maps. It's a kind of visual like this. 98% sure that it was made with DataWrapper. DataWrapper is really good for the basic types of charts if you want something more out of the box, and also something with maybe a bit nicer animations or transitions that you can use in a kind of storytelling setup. You should definitely have a look at Flourish. Flourish has been acquired by Canva, and since then has seen a lot of work being done, and they can really do some really nice things. For example, just to give you an idea of what I mentioned with storytelling, of course you're a little bit playing in a kind of fixed format, but what you can do within that format is quite nice. For example, a circle packing. In this case, we have 4 little slides here, 4 little parts of the story. The circle packing shows all of the Nobel Prize winners since 1901. We can go to the next slide, where we have a nice transition to a division between male and female Nobel Prize winners, or we can have a look at how that looks like by category, or we can rearrange things in a different way, and so on. So, and Flourish will typically take care of these nice transitions, and again, this can be embedded in a presentation or in a website or whatever. So if you're thinking on or thinking of creating kind of storytelling with your charts, then you should definitely check out Flourish. Again, freemium tool, roughly the same idea as DataWrapper, quite generous in the free version if you can live with a little bit of credits near the bottom. And then again, to underline my point that it doesn't really matter that much which tool you use. Several people have become famous with their hand-drawn data visuals. Mona Shalabi always has this kind of a little bit of humoristic approach, but just with pen and paper and some colored markers probably. Another one worth mentioning is, of course, the Their Data project by Stefanie Pusavec and Georgia Lupi. Stefanie lives in London and Georgia lives in New York. They decided to do a project together where over the course of a single year, they sent postcards to each other every week. They collected data from their own lives. At the end of the week, they took an empty postcard and created hand-drawn data visuals. And some of them are really beautiful and intricate. Some of them are a little bit more crude. But at the end of the project, all of the 104 postcards became a very successful book and a popular website, but they were also acquired by the Museum of Modern Art in New York, where they're now part of the permanent exhibition. So if your hand-drawn data visuals can become part of the exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art, then I think that fully proves my point that it really doesn't matter that much which tool you are using. And then there are people who use physical objects to create data visuals. This is a relatively old but still a nice example from National Geographic. There are people who even use just leftover food they found in their fridge in order to create data visuals. So again, I don't care at all which tool you're going to use. It is the principles of choosing the right chart type, the signal to noise ratio, and so on, which are going to determine whether your chart is working or not working. And then I'm going to wrap up this session with a little bit of a demonstration. I definitely want to show how raw graphs works, just because I'm so such a big fan of that tool. And I also want to show you what I mean if I talk about use a combination of tools, or in a lot of situations it's more efficient to have a combination of tools. So I want to recreate this chart that I found online. It's not my own work, but it is a nice looking area chart. Probably we could make this with Excel as well, an area chart, but I want to give it a try with raw graphs and then with a combination of raw graphs and PowerPoint. So we're looking at music sales here, different types of formats, and you can see how there was a big peak around the year 2000, especially coming from compact disc or CD sales, and then it started to decline again, and now we have an increase again with streaming, MP3, etc. So let's have a look how we can do something like that. I have here in Excel the data that we need. I've already prepared it a little bit in the format that raw graphs likes to see it, that most data visualization tools like to see their data one dimension per column. So in this case we have 3 dimensions. We have the format, we have the year, and we have the sales. We have that A-track is a bit of an older format, but for each of the formats we have the data from 1973 until 2019. So for example, for CDs in the year 2000, we had a revenue of 19,830.79 million US dollars. So I'm just for now, I'm going to select all. I'm just going to copy it to my clipboard, and that's all we need to do for now. And then let's have a look at how raw graphs looks like. So raw graphs, as mentioned here, is a free and open source tool. So raw graphs is completely free. It's also open source. So if you for some reason would be worried about data confidentiality or something like that, you can just go to GitHub, you can have a look at the code, you can download the code, you can run things locally if that is something you want. But I have no indication at all that something would be happening with the data. As far as I know, it's not even transferred. This is a fully browser-based, front-end based tool, so you don't have to worry. But if you would be worrying, you can run things locally as well. Okay, so let's just click on use it now. First of all, we of course have to get our data into raw graphs. In a way, we can upload the data set. You can link to a URL or a database, but in our case, most of the times it's just easiest to paste the data that we had on our clipboard straight from Excel. And you will notice that raw graphs is smart enough to recognize the first row are headers, format is text-based, year and sales is number-based, 329 rows have been successfully parsed, everything is green, so we can proceed. In step number 2, we have the option of all of the different really nice chart types in there. So again, matrix plots, B-swarm plots, a nice calendar heat map might be something interesting, or the Voronoi charts. Those are the types of charts for which I will always come to raw graphs. In our case, we're looking for a stream graph / area chart. Step number 3 is a short step, but it's probably the most important step. We have to tell raw graphs how to build the chart. And so we have our dimensions from our data on the left-hand side, the format, the year and sales, so the 3 columns. On the right-hand side, we have chart variables. So these are things that raw graphs needs to know in order to construct the chart. This is different for each chart type, but for a stream graph or an area chart, we need to know what's on the horizontal axis, that's required, and then we can tell it what should be the size, the streams, and maybe the series. So probably on the horizontal axis, we're going to need the year. We can just drag and drop. And in step number 4, already raw graphs is starting to build the chart for us. The size of the streams, that should probably be the number of sales. And now if we have a look at step number 4, you can see that the basic shape is already there. We're just missing the breakdown in different streams. So probably we have to drag format to streams, and now we have our nice breakdown into the different streams that we were looking for. By the way, notice there's also a series option here. If you drag format to series rather than to streams. We have this kind of small multiple setup if that is something that you're trying to make, but for now format to streams is what we're looking for. And then we run a little bit into the limitations of raw graphs design wise. So we have some customization options here, which sounds promising, but it's sometimes a bit underwhelming. So labels, for example, I don't really like these labels. They're too small, the font is not okay, they're too dark, they're really hard to read, but yeah, basically the only thing we can do is show them or not show them. So if we want to improve the label styling and positioning, etc., we will have to do that in another tool. The same for colors. Yes, we can change all of the colors here individually if you have a lot of time on your hand, but the color schemes that we have out of the box are a little bit, yeah, there are only 3, they're all equally ugly, and they're never going to highlight exactly what you want to highlight. So also the colors, I would suggest to do that in a different tool. The interesting options are under charts, where we can play with the sorting of the streams, like earliest or reverse or something like that, ascending, descending. The curve type, so the interpolation, now it's bump, it's kind of smoothed interpolation, but maybe you want to have a kind of stepwise interpolation like this. In our case, linear, I think, is a good option. The vertical alignment, in this case we have none, so we have a normal stacked area chart, but we can have like a 100% area chart if that's what you're looking for. If you're looking for something more dynamic, we can have the silhouette option or even the wiggle option to have like a very dynamic, might be nice in the kind of central infographic to draw the attention. In our case, we're looking for something a bit more boring, so none is perfectly fine. You can choose whether you want to have a y-axis or not. So some interesting options, but layout-wise, looks-wise, design-wise, not really that ideal. Okay. So I'm going to download this at this point, or export it at this point with raw graphs. We can export as a vector image, also as a bitmap image, but since we want to edit this further, choosing vector image is probably the smartest, or .raw graphs if you want to continue working on this later. But for now, just the SVG is perfectly fine. And then we can have a look in, let's say, PowerPoint in order to finish up our design. I will maybe stop the presentation just to be sure. And see what we can do here. So we have our vector image, it's in our downloads folder. I'm just going to go to insert, pictures, and then this device. Let's have a look in our downloads folder. Here we have our raw graphs file. So here is our vector image. It is not really editable currently, because in PowerPoint we have to click on the magic button convert to shape, or you can right click and then click convert to shape. And now it is actually a group of individual vector elements or vector paths. So each of these streams is now individually editable. All of these labels have become individual text boxes and so on. So we can edit them individually. Which means that, first of all, these annoying labels, I find them way too small and hard to read. So we can maybe just select all of them. Maybe white is a better color. And definitely we're going to make them a bit bigger. We can choose a font that fits a bit better, maybe something like Bahnschift. If you want, we can have uppercase. And then we can position each of them in a place where it would make sense, nice and central. Ringtones is a little bit big, so we can make that one a bit smaller. Downloads and so on. The streaming, there's not really that much space for it, so we can put it a little bit to the side, and then maybe we can give it the same color as the stream itself, as a kind of alternative. And then for the colors, we can have a look at the reference visual here that we are trying to mimic. Let's paste it here just for a quick reference, and we can see if we can maybe use the eyedropper tool to copy those colors, the 8-track and the cassettes, and in just a very short amount of time we will be able to get most of the way there. Streaming is this kind of light green. Oh, I was too fast. It's kind of a light green. And then we had this weird ringtone craze here between 2005 and 2015, which could be like this. And there we are. We can of course continue. We can change the title, put it into a nice title. We have to optimize the horizontal axis a little bit. Something I sometimes like to do is stretch this out a little bit so we have a bit more of a visually impactful visual. But my main point is everything that you want to do with this is probably easier to do in something like PowerPoint or Inkscape than in RawGraphs itself. So a combination of tools, RawGraphs really nice to very quickly get us the shapes of the charts, but for the layout we probably have to look at a different, more design optimized tool. Okay, and then we can wrap things up with, I just have an exercise for you just to get a little bit into the habit of doing this yourself. I would really like to give you a try with RawGraphs, as it is free, as it is so powerful. So I have some data for you, data which you can download at this link, baryon.be/files/workshop and then /wealth.xlsx. That's an Excel file, nicely prepared data with the different countries in the world and the wealth that is present in these countries. We can make this kind of circle packing visual in RawGraphs, and then you can use, let's say, PowerPoint or Inkscape if you want, or any other tool to make it look more or less like the chart that we have on the right hand side. Good. That brings us to the end of this short video summary of a very brief overview of data visualization, the important things to know. Thank you very much for sticking it out to the end. I hope that you give the exercise a try. Again, if you want to revisit something that we have discussed, some interesting book recommendations or video recommendations or even podcast recommendations, you can do so on the companion resource website. And if there are other questions, feel free to send me an email, feel free to harass me on Twitter or Blue Sky or LinkedIn, wherever. I would be more than happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much.